Hello, just a quick one before we get into today's episode. I'm running my next Amazon Seller Support and Connect session at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 6th of May. It's completely free, and if you're selling on Amazon and feeling a bit stuck or you've got questions you want answered properly, this is for you. It's a relaxed session, part update, part Q&A, and you can bring whatever it is you're working on. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for you to book your place. It's completely free. I'd love to see you there.
Welcome to the Bring Your Product Idea to Life podcast. This is the podcast for you if you're getting started selling products or if you'd like to create your own product to sell. I'm Vicky Weinberg, a product creation coach and Amazon expert. Every week, I share friendly, practical advice as well as inspirational stories from small businesses. Let's get started. Hi, so today on the podcast, I'm speaking to Christabel Biella. Christabel is a fractional COO and commercial operations strategist where she works with early stage product brand founders to figure out growth plans, make sure they're sustainable and profitable, and fix issues in commercial operations underneath it. So Christabel has got 20 years experience of working in retail, and she's worked with really big brands. She's worked with small brands and startups. She has so much experience, and we cover such a lot in this episode. So we start off talking about growth, but we cover inventory, we cover your product range, how to know whether you're profitable, how selling on different marketplaces and wholesale works within your business mix. Honestly, this is such a great episode. I'm personally learned a lot in this 40 minutes or whatever it is, and I really hope you will do too. Might be one to listen to again, might be one to take some notes on because there is such a lot in here. And listen out towards the end. Christabel mentions that she's offering a free 20-minute call. If you listen to this episode and you think, oh, actually, I might have an issue with that, or I'm not quite sure about what you've just covered, she's really happy to have a free 20-minute call with you. And the link to that is going to be in the show notes for this episode. So do take advantage of that. If anything you hear resonates, there's anything that you're worried about, that you have questions about, do take Christabel up on that because she is super knowledgeable, as you will hear in this episode. And I would love now to introduce you to Christabel. Say hi, Christabel. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Vicky. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to be chatting to you today.
Me too. So much to cover. But can we please start by you giving an introduction to yourself, your business, and what you do?
Of course. So I'm Christabel. I run CB Co, which is a fractional consultancy that I've been running for the last couple of years. And I work as a fractional operator and consultant with product brand founders who are at growth or early stages, helping them to build or fix their commercial model that sits underneath their business so that growth can feel lighter for them, not heavier. My background is that I have over 20 years in the retail industry. I started my career as a buyer and merchandiser at big name high street retailers such as the Frasers Group and TK Maxx. And then about a decade ago, I actually left the high street world behind and decided instead to join sort of growing e-commerce startups. So the areas that I have really spanned across in that last decade or two are homewares, grocery, beauty and lifestyle brands.
Amazing, thank you. So I'd love to talk about growth to kick things off because I know that's what you specialise in, Christabel. So
Sure.
I guess the first question to ask is, what does healthy growth look like in a product-based business? I know it sounds like a big question, but I mean, of course, there's growth and then there's healthy, sustainable growth. So I'd love to touch on that before we go a bit more specific, please.
Of course. I mean, growth, everybody wants growth, don't they? And I think a lot of founders really think that more sales equals healthy growth, but that isn't necessarily always the case. To me, what good sustainable growth looks like is where there's a healthy tension between what you're selling, who you're selling it to and where you're selling it, what you're saying to your customers and how much you're selling it for. And those key facets, they sound really simple, but actually it's when a founder's really got a good grasp of them, you've really tested and validated those things, and they're working together really well. A healthy company have these aligned, so they'll be clear on their brand and their position in the market and who they're targeting and understanding their customers' motivations. However, on the flip side, an unhealthy brand could be a great product, but a poorly communicated brand. Or it could be that you're not being clear on what your promise is and specifically who you're serving. But in essence, if those things are working well together, then your revenue, your profit, and your cash flow should all be moving in the same direction together. If they're not, then your growth is going to feel complex, burdened, and heavy rather than feeling like it's going in the right direction.
That makes sense. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So Are there any sort of signs that a brand is growing but in a way that isn't actually healthy or sustainable? What are some things to maybe look out
Yeah, there
for?
are a few red flags that I definitely spot in the brands that I work with. So the first thing I would say is customer acquisition is key, as everybody knows. But actually, if a brand is spending over time, if they're spending more money to acquire those customers and those customers are becoming more expensive to acquire, then something is probably a bit off. It could be that you've expanded your product range as well, but your best sellers, the ones that are making the most money for you, are actually subsidizing the rest of that range that you've expanded. And they may not be, those expanded products may not be selling as well as what you'd expected. And that could also add drag to your business because it's diluting your offer as well to your customers. The other important part is your channel mix. So if you're adding more channels before your first channel is profitable, or if you start with the wrong channel, then you could be putting your business on the wrong footing because you may not have established yourself enough in the market. So those are probably the biggest ones. And then behind the scenes, in terms of the operations, firstly with hiring. So if a founder hasn't fully built out their process and they don't really know what that is, the hire isn't sure what to run. I can talk about that a bit more in detail later on.
Oh, yes,
And then
please.
another red flag for me is if the founder is doing more and more, but not less and less as the business is growing, that is also a bit of a red flag.
Thank you. That's really useful. Have you ever seen an example of a brand that's increasing their sales, but actually financially they're worse off? And if so, obviously without giving any names,
Of
what was
course.
going on to cause that?
Yes, it's a really good question. I've been in a business where it's scaled 6 times its revenue in under 2 years. It was the highest growth business I have ever worked in. So on the surface, that was absolutely phenomenal in terms of sales growth rate. However, the operating margin was suffering below the line. And what had really happened is that there'd been a rapid increase in the product range that nobody had costed properly. So the original assumption was we'll have fewer products with bigger volume rather than lots more products with smaller volumes as they were testing. And channel costs were invisible because nobody was really tracking margin by channel, which was really important. And in order to grasp and grab those sales, there was a lot of heavy promotional discounting going on, which really eroded that margin. And then the customers were then trained to wait for those promotions, which is always a dangerous place to be in. So even though those sales looked great, the P&L was telling a very different story, and that operating margin wasn't stabilizing and improving as it should be as the business was maturing.
That makes sense. And I guess with such rapid growth, especially if a brand's launching lots of new products, maybe trying out different channels, unless you're really keeping an eye on the numbers, I think it can be really easy for things to just, to not realize you're running at a loss. I know that sometimes I'm called in to work with brands on Amazon and they find out that actually that's a channel that's not profitable for them. And you've probably seen the same, Christabel, because it can really eat into your margins, particularly if you're paying out for fulfillment and ads and all of the other things. And I guess if you're working across multiple channels and some of them are running at a loss, that's going to have a huge impact.
Absolutely, exactly. And I think it's where there's not visibility and you're not tracking them, the business isn't tracking them, it just sort of edges away over time and it can be subtle underneath. And then before you know it, you're sort of miles out from where you thought you were. So it's really important to track those things.
So you mentioned hiring earlier and the importance of hiring. I would love to know, how do you get your first hire right? And perhaps like on the other side, what mistakes do you sometimes see with the first hire as well? Because I'm
Yeah,
assuming that the first hire is probably the trickiest.
it really is. So there's a few things I think in terms of starting on the kind of the first hire mistake side of things. Often a first hire can fail because there could not be maybe there's not a process for them to run. So really, before you've even thought about hiring, have you documented what you do, how you do it, what good looks like, and then bring them in. If you haven't, you're asking someone to basically help you build the plane whilst flying it. So that's always not a good thing. Before you hire anyone, really think, what are those things that you're asking them to deliver for you? If you can write down 3 key things that are going to move the needle, then you're probably ready to bring someone in. If not, then you're probably not ready. And if you don't know what that process looks like, that's often where an operator like myself can really help the founder to build and sort of iron out those processes for scaling before a hire is even involved. The other thing I would say is that because your business is changing so rapidly, you're learning new things all the time, especially in the early stages. that don't feel like, even though you might have a really clear idea on who that person is that you want to hire, that could change quite quickly. So I think keeping your commitments quite flexible and also leaning into fractional operators like myself that have a lot of experience in the industry can be so useful, because what it can do is actually just sort of give you a bit of a head start where you're not having to figure things out, because the figuring things out phase can actually cost you time, resource, and money. So if you can really lend and bring in really, really relevant experience to your product and business early on, then that's going to give you a really good stead. And that they can also then help you out with figuring out who your hire should be and what gaps you have in your team.
That makes sense. Thank you. Because I guess one of the things to think about if you're looking to make a hire is, well, what are you hiring someone for? Because I think when you start off with a product business, you're doing it all yourself. So where, that's presumably the product design, and you're doing the marketing, and you're doing the accounting, and you're doing the fulfillment, you're doing everything. How do you know where to even start with a hire? What you should carry on doing, what someone else could be doing for you. Because I imagine it's really overwhelming to go from doing everything and then also feeling you've got the time to onboard somebody as well. That's another reason I think this must be such a tricky transition.
Yeah, it's quite a balance, isn't it, to really understand. I think that's where, I from all the founders that I've worked with and all the businesses, I think it's the founders that truly have an understanding of where their strengths lie, what they're really good at, and what they're feeling actually is just not a good use of the time. So if you can really understand where your strengths are, where the gaps are that you need someone to fill in, that's always a good place to start, because then you are focused, your time and resource and energy is going to be focused on value that you're adding to the business rather than drag. So that was what I would say. I think often, and it's not always the case, but often a founder tends to be quite visionary, big picture thinker, really thinking about how, bringing new ideas to the table, new things to market. And actually, there's a lot in that. If you're fundraising as well and you're thinking about that further down the line, there's a lot of energy and effort goes into that. And sometimes the kind of day-to-day can be the operations and the business as usual kind of tasks. That often tends to be the thing that you could probably release, because it's not really using a good use of your time to another hire. So I'd say that's often a good place to start, but it obviously varies by founder and where you're at and what stage your business is at.
Of course. Thank you. That is really useful. But I'd love to move on, if that's okay, and talk a little bit about price, because there's so many things I want to ask you about. So we might be jumping around a bit, but hopefully this will give everyone a really good overview. So I'd like to talk about, first of all, pricing mistakes, because I'm sure you see instances where, especially when selling online, where pricing doesn't look quite right, or there's things that people haven't considered. So let's start there, if that's okay.
Of course. So there are some sort of common pricing mistakes to definitely watch out for when you're selling online. I think the first thing people always do is compare to their competitors, right? So pricing based on what your competitors are charging is not a good place to start. Really start from your own cost structure of your business and what your P&L is telling you, your profit and loss account. So your cost base will always be different to your competitor. You don't know who they're working with and how they're operating. The second thing when you're pricing is really think about all the costs in your margin. Don't just think about the product cost. So founders can often forget about cost of fulfillment, returns, marketplace fees, packaging, payment processing, the cost of sending out your parcels via couriers. So don't just price from your raw product cost, but also add those things into what you think would be a cost per order before you think about markup. Otherwise, you're not going to have any money left. And then finally, discounting and promotions. So discounting or promoting without a strategy in just a reactive state is never a good thing. And that always eats away at what you think your margin will be. So really understanding that impact of what that discounting could do to your margin and thinking about it ahead of time. So for example, 20% discount on a product with a 40% gross margin is actually going to wipe out half your profit on that unit if you have that on average throughout the life of that sales for your product. So those are probably the things that you need to factor behind the scenes when really thinking about setting your price. And then the final thing is actually I always say to brands, set your position, because you can always adjust later on. And it tends to be easier to adjust down than up. pricing up is actually really difficult. So give yourself a generous margin to begin with, and you can always adjust as you go along.
That makes a lot of sense. And I totally agree with you, because it's really hard to justify why you're putting extra extra cost in your product, particularly in the early days. I think if you're an established brand and you're selling something where maybe the cost of raw materials have gone up, and you communicate that well, I've definitely seen examples of brands put their prices up and do it well. But I do think it's really tricky. So I'm totally with you that it makes much more sense to adjust down if you need to. Although I guess that probably needs a bit of managing as well, but it must be easier to go in that direction. How can someone sense check whether their pricing is actually working? Because coming back to what we said at the beginning, your sales might look brilliant, but maybe your profits don't. So
Yeah.
how can you sense check whether, your price is actually right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's the first thing I would start with is internally rather than externally. So just cut out the noise, cut out what your competitors are doing. Here's a simple exercise. Take your top 10 products, or maybe if you don't have that many products, your top 5. The selling price of what you're selling at, not just your RRP, actually your average selling price over the course of the life of your product. Then subtract every cost that you can find from each order that you're sending out. And it's so that will be your product cost, then your shipping inbound from your supplier, your packaging, marketplace fees, payment processing, pick and pack from your warehouse or your 3PL, and then your delivery to customer, and then also your expected returns. And the other thing to think about is if your average basket, so the average transaction that you're sending out, is more than one product, don't forget to sort of divide that correctly between the number of products per order. What you have left after all of that, with your sales minus those true costs, is your contribution margin. If any of those products have a contribution margin below 20%, they are probably costing you money once you've accounted for your fixed overheads. So that's just a simple math to have a look at with your product structure. And so that's kind of the internal approach. And then the other thing I would think about is the would I notice test. So if you were to remove a product from your range and nobody really noticed, so the sales didn't really dip that much, then it's probably not the pricing that's the problem, it's probably the product. And then finally, obviously, you need to keep abreast of what the market's doing and your competitors are doing, and that's always good to know. And especially if you can see kind of volatile activity that happens with pricing elsewhere, just to keep an eye on it, because there could be reasons behind the scenes why that competitor is doing it. But it doesn't mean you need to react to what they're doing. It's just being aware and having a strategy to kind of combat that.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I like what you say about not, blocking out what your competitors are doing. However, do you think there is any benefit in, when I say benchmarking against your competitors, what I mean by that is, do you think there is a benefit in looking at what your competitors are charging, what their product is, and sort of where yours might align? So, for example, is your product a bit more premium than theirs, and using that sort of information to help you guide your products? Or would you just not look at what your competitors are doing at all?
I think it's really important to know, actually. It's very, very important to be aware of what your competitors are doing. But I think I always think of pricing, it's the exchange of value, right, between you and your customer. So it's if your customer values you really highly and the brand that you're putting out there and your value proposition, all the things you're talking about, then yes, pricing does come into it, but it's kind of part of that whole equation. So yeah, I would say that yes, you do need to benchmark. You need to definitely do a comparative shop across the market, look at your competitors, where their pricing sits, what are their brand unique selling points, and what are the value levers that they're offering their customers, and how do yours differ to that, so that you're putting yourself in a more unique position, and how then do you justify where your price is sitting. So it's not just a flat line, look at a price and look at another price. It's actually what's sitting below that surface in terms of that brand messaging and what sort of value that you're adding to your whole customer journey and brand proposition to the customer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you said that, because when I work with brands who are looking to sell on Amazon, that's one of the things that I always tell them to do, is go and look who else is on there, look at what they're doing, what they're pricing, what they're offering, how many reviews have they got, what's the customers fit, all of those things. So I'm glad you said that, and I have been giving good advice after all, because I agree with you. I think it's really important to know what your competitors are doing, and
Absolutely.
not because you have to necessarily fall in line, but I am with you that I think your pricing has to make sense in the marketplace. Like, you can't just charge
Yeah,
£10 more than everyone else because you feel like it. There has to be like a commercial reason behind it.
definitely.
Now, you mentioned range there before, because you were talking, when you talked about one of the tests you were mentioning was, could I remove this product and would anyone notice? So I'd like to talk a little bit more about product range. So how do you decide whether to expand your existing range or whether to focus on what's already working? Because that's something I'm asked sometimes. Often brands have one or two or maybe a few more products that kind of drive most of their sales. And they'll say, okay, so do I focus on these and making them really work for me, or can I introduce new products, and how does that all work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say your existing products need to be absolutely stress tested before you think about adding new. Add new with caution is what I say, because as soon as you add new products, you are starting to dilute your offer, and it's then becoming kind of more expensive to market each individual product to customers. So before adding new products, first of all, ask, is my existing range working as hard as it can be? Do your best sellers still have untapped channels, marketing angles that you've not tried, custom segments that you've not tried? So take the expansion off the table for a second and just look at those things, because it could be, can you enhance, the existing product with a bundle? Could you do add-ons to your product before adding something completely different into the mix? But always remember that kind of financial decision framework. So look at your contribution margin first. If you are thinking about a new product, does that contribution work as you scale? Is it sustainable? And how is it going to add to the profitability and of your business? Then look at your market demand. And I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive to think about your sort of profitability before the demand, but anyone can sell anything. And if it's not going to be sustainable as you grow, there's from profit angle, there's really no point in selling something for nothing. And then think about your operational complexity. So how is that by adding that product into your business? To my point earlier about that business that was really struggling as it scaled, does that add operational complexity, or is it fairly straightforward to just add another one? And actually, it's not just operations, it's marketing as well, because when you're advertising your products out there, again, you're pulling away the attention from your existing products. So really think about those kind of decision markers. If you do then think, yes, I've definitely found a gap, then your expansion should be pulled by genuinely what your customers are asking for you to give them. So get them, bring them in pulled by customer demand, rather than just being bored or the fear that you don't have enough products to grow, because that normally just isn't true.
That
So
makes a lot
that's
of
what I would
sense.
say when deciding expansion versus existing range.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing cash flow comes into it as well, because there's also, money that needs to go into funding a new product. So I guess you have to be very sure, or at least as sure as you can be, that this product is worth investing in before you start putting money behind it.
Absolutely. Such a good point, because a new product launch, if you think about all the resource and investment that's needed, you've got photography, production, you've got to put copy in place, you've got to think about customer service and returns and those operational bits as well of how to support that product. So there's a lot to consider when bringing a new product to market, of course. And that could take away from actually what you've already got that's working really well for you, and maybe just needs to work a bit harder.
And I really liked your point earlier about, is there anything you can do with your existing products? Because I worked for a brand recently, and something they decided to do was to offer their existing products in different sizes. So a bigger version that was a bit more cost effective for the customer, rather than buying two of the small ones, if you see what I mean. And that worked really well for them, because it's the same product, does the same thing. It's literally just a different size option. And
Yeah,
personally, I thought that was really quite a smart way of doing it.
absolutely.
And I guess there's other things you can do in terms of, do you offer your products in different colours or different? I've seen examples of things like that over the years, which I think can really work. Although, of course, there's a danger, because I used to have my own product range and I used to sell products, and one of them I sold in 6 different colours. But of course, there's the ones that sell, and then there's the ones that don't sell. And you've obviously worked with brands that have had really large ranges. And what are some of the dangers you've seen of having too many products too quickly?
Um, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think the main thing is, if there's sort of too many products in the range, that range can develop a bit of a long tail. So like I said, every product you add, it not only needs to sell, but it also is taking up that resource. And what happens is if you have a super wide range like that, if you have products in there, lots of them that are slow movers, they're going to be sitting in your warehouse, tying up cash in your bank account where, the stock is just not moving and it's kind of stuck. So really think about that 80-20 rule when it comes to your product range. I've dealt with brands that have as many as, 5,000 products. And the same applies for them as much as it does for a brand that, say, only has a few hundred or less than that. So there's an 80-20 rule, which is that most brands will find the top 20% of their product range will generate the majority of their sales. So what's the other 80% doing? Are you still spending equal amounts of energy on that other 80%? That 80% will have a hidden cost to it. And that's what I personally call, it's a term that I use called SKU tax, because basically those extra products are kind of like a tax on your business where you don't actually need that extra cost. What you need is to be working more efficiently from a financial point of view with your products. So it can be tempting to think I need to offer every possible niche and gap to my customers, but I think it's really important to kind of know where your boundaries sit, where to draw the line, and focus on what you do really super well, and kind of keep the peripheral to just take it out and just unnecessary distractions.
Thank you. And for any founders listening now, is there a simple way for them to review their existing range and spot what's hurting their business or what's not helping anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. So the simplest way to review a range is, if you think about it, sort your products into 4 key buckets. So the first one is your heroes. So your heroes are high volume, high margin products. Those are going to carry your business. So protect them with everything and just make sure that you've got really strong sales and marketing plans to consistently keep those. They're going to be the bread and butter of your revenue and your profits. Then the second bucket are your risk products. So those are high volume but low margin products. If they are high volume and low margin, they're going to be eating away at your profitability. So do you need to fix the pricing on those, or do you kind of limit any promotional activity, or do you need to address the costs for those products? The third bucket are your niche products. So they are probably something that could be adding to your unique selling point and your brand positioning. They are low volume and high margin. Can you grow them more? So because they've got good margin against them, but you're just not selling enough of them. So are there better ways of selling them? And then the fourth final bucket are your dead weight products. So those are your low volume, low margin products. So can you cut them or test out whether you do a price increase on them? Typically 15 to 30% of most product ranges are actively costing the brands money. So do a health check on your product range using those 4 buckets. You don't necessarily have to cull your products or kill them, but you could be looking at a way to free up your cash and resource for the products that are actually working for you and just give you a bit more clarity.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I wanted to talk about something sort of related to products, which is inventory, because I know this is something a lot of founders struggle with because there's a lot of cash tied up in inventory. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see here? And do you have any advice on how to manage your inventory really well? Because particularly if you have a lot of products, this is such a challenge.
Yes, it is. And it's definitely an area which, if you do have complexity in this area, it's just something that I've worked with for so many years. And what I would say is one of the biggest mistakes is buying based on gut instinct or hope. So especially if it could be that you are about to test a new product, or you've had an initial trial and it's gone really well and you think the same thing's going to happen again. I think there's just ways of putting some conservative estimates on that and just making sure you're not over being optimistically buying. So be really clear, what are my weekly sales or my rate of sales? So that's your sales per channel per week. Multiply that out across how long you want to sell that product for before you need to reorder it again, or before you want to, if it's limited edition, take it out. And then use that calculation to work out how much you need to buy. So it normally is X amount of units for Y amounts of weeks of cover that you want to have sitting in stock. Your weeks of cover is basically your total stock divided by your weekly sales that you're selling through. So think about it. If you have 26 weeks of stock sitting there, weeks of cover stock, that's 6 months of cash that's being tied up. that's not releasing and making sales from. The other thing is getting tempted with lower cost prices for high volume. So a lot of people can overbuy on a product, particularly if it's new or it's untested, because the minimum order quantity from the supplier is too high. It's generally better to take a bit of a margin hit. If you can't negotiate a lower sort of quantity for your first order, then it's generally better to pay a little bit more in the beginning per unit, because actually cash flow is everything. So if you can buy fewer units, be leaner, and maybe spend a slightly higher cost price just whilst you're validating and testing, and then you can afford to get cheaper, lower cost prices as your volume grows. And then also not having a markdown or exit strategy. So every single product needs a plan B. If it's not selling at your full price in your allocated selling window, what are you going to do about it next? What are your promotions likely to be? And then how is that then going to affect your stock? So those are the key things to think about when you're managing inventory.
Thank you. And this is a question I've just been thinking about as you were talking. So I don't know if it's going to be an easy one to answer or not. But the general things I see people having problems with are having too much stock and having a lot of cash tied up in stock. And obviously that can lead to storage fees and things like that. Or constantly going out of stock because maybe they've got long lead times or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Is there a better or worse option out of the two, or are neither ideal?
That's a really good question. I would say I'm always in favor of going out of stock. I think don't be scared of scarcity, because scarcity can actually create buzz and it can create demand if you market it in the right way. So, I think there's so many great examples of that in all different categories from brands where they've dealt with that really well, whether it's, a limited release and so on. And actually, if you know that up front and you know there's a bit of risk in potentially selling out, you can upfront that into your marketing messaging and so on for campaigns you're running. I always say that is better than sitting on too much stock and then having to promote it and discount and to try and clear it. It's then costing you extra in storage. It just puts a lot of financial pressure on you. And it also means you could end up doing that reactionary thing that I mentioned earlier of promoting or discounting from a reactionary point of view rather than a strategic point of view, which is always a bit dangerous for your kind of customer behavior and also your brand positioning. So, what I would say though is generally if something is going out of stock, it's probably because demand has been way higher than what you anticipated. Is that because you just didn't call it right? Or is it because your pricing was too aggressive or your promotion strategy wasn't, you just weren't prepared for it? So I think always try and have an upfront campaign or promotional plan before you even buy the product. It might change, but then you've kind of factored in that buffer if you need it for dealing with potential out of stocks. But always err on the side of caution when you're planning your stocks. It's always better to have too little than too much.
I think so, because I think from a customer point of view as well. So I'm thinking of myself as a customer. If something goes out of stock, I want it more. I don't know about you, but there is something about scarcity. And
Definitely.
as you were saying before, I think there's a really good point that if you have a product that is going out of stock to work out why, because as you say, you might be discounting too heavily, for example, or for too long, or I suppose there's lots of reasons it could be, but it's a really good point to think about why that's happening. Because I think it's probably could be too easy to go, oh, that's good, we've sold out of that, brilliant. But not actually look at, at the reasons for it, because it could be that you're really underpricing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on a little bit and talk about the different channels that we sell on. So do you see any difference between when brands are selling on other marketplaces versus their own websites when it comes to their margins, when it comes to the control they've got, maybe the oversight and the understanding they have?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think it's sometimes something that can trip brands up by maybe starting on one before they really know have a sort of plan in place. So what I would say is always start from, I think it's a healthy, my healthy recommendation would be start from your own channel. If you start from your own channel, you instantly get data back, you get a relationship with a customer, and you have control over your pricing and your margin. Obviously, you need to drive your own traffic, which can be challenging. But if you can do that successfully, then you're going to get great insights off before you even gone further afield. Then when you're thinking about Amazon or marketplace has its place. Like, obviously, it's great for driving traffic, making your brand be discovered, giving you that market exposure, but you need to be prepared because it's a volatile place for pricing. So you need to be prepared for margin and how that fluctuates as pricing does. And you're going to lose a little bit of control on your pricing. I'm not sure, I'm not an Amazon expert, but I do know that it's obviously challenging sometimes to kind of be seen in the algorithm and make sure that your pricing is right. So it's just having that knowledge in place and kind of planning ahead of time before going on there. So I would say if you're only on Amazon and you don't know what your true net margin is, that can be a really dangerous place to be in. So it's just having that kind of preparedness and visibility. I would say actually a really good, healthy place is to actually blend. So you've got your own site, which is giving you that control you need on your margin and your brand, but then you can layer in marketplace or wholesale for that discovery market exposure and that incremental volume. But it's really important to see tracking economics of each channel separately, but then how they come together and stack up that revenue and profit in your own business, and how that is then what the development plan over time is for each of those channels. They are channels at the end of the day. They're not a business model. So Amazon is a channel, not a business model. Same with your own site. They're just part of a bigger picture.
Thank you. I totally agree. I always think having your own website and knowing that your product sells and knowing what customers think of your products and just having a really good solid base is a must before starting on Amazon. But personally, I don't think
Yeah.
it's the channel to start on. And I also think you need to factor in how much time and effort it's going to take you to get going on Amazon as well, because I think that's something else that people sometimes don't consider, is that it will take some sort of investment, whether that's time, whether that's money, resource, whatever it is. And that needs to be factored in as well, because you're not necessarily going to be making a profit there from day one. And there are all those costs, whether, like I say, whether it's time or money to consider before you even get started. So I think that's a really big
Absolutely.
consideration. And I'm sure, I mean, I only specialize in Amazon, but I'm sure for any other channel, it's the same. There is going to be an
It's
upfront
absolutely the same
cost.
principles apply. Yeah, it's really knowing, like you say, what the kind of expenditure is of your resource and your time, energy, and money in the stock that you need to provide for that, and how that fits into your overall business model, and kind of just being so aware of that and planning that out before you go in.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned wholesale there, Christabel, as well, when you were talking about channels. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what founders should know before they decide to try wholesale, because again, it's another channel and it can be a really good one. But, how do you know when you're ready, and what do you need to think about before thinking, okay, this is something I'm going to go forward with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think wholesale is obviously very exciting. It can be such a validating time if a retailer or wholesaler has agreed to stock your product. But I think you just need to be super aware of your margin structure and your payment terms that you are going to agree with that retailer or wholesaler, which can put a growing brand at risk. So where are you in your own kind of growth journey and maturity stage of your business? That's really important to look at. So your sales projections, how your other channels are performing before layering in that B2B wholesale piece. So, I mean, always remember, depending on your product type or your brand positioning, your wholesale price that you're offering out is typically going to be 40 to 60% off your retail price. And if your own retail margin is already low, then you could be selling at near cost. So that's something that you need to be super aware of. And then the payment terms. So typically they will be 30 to 90 days net after that stock is received. So you are essentially funding that retailer or wholesaler their stock with your cash, if that is the case. And then finally, on certain retailers, I think I've definitely noticed this when I worked for Fraser's Group and sort of seeing premium department stores, there are often sort of sale or return agreements. So if the product doesn't sell through, some retailers will want to send your stock back. So that's something as a red flag just to be aware of, because obviously that's a humongous cost to do that. So before saying yes to wholesale, run through those numbers, run through those sales projections, and then ultimately your profit projections as well. What's your landed cost? What margins are you making at wholesale? And how long is it until you get paid? And what does that cash flow cycle look like? And then how does it ladder up and like stack up into your revenue model and your profit model as you scale? So really getting a handle on that, so it's not kind of becoming this beast that kind of overtakes and then eats into your profitability as you grow, is really, really important.
Thank you so much, Christabel. By the way, thank you for everything, because I feel like in the last 30 minutes we've covered such a lot, but it's been so useful. I feel like I should have been taking notes or something. There's so much in here. This has been brilliant. Before I ask you the final question, I would love to know, how can people find out a bit more about you? How can they work with you? And what kind of services do you offer?
Of course. So first of all, my website is really simple. It's cbco, one word, .uk. So cbco.uk. I am actually offering a sprint. So what I am offering now is a free 20-minute call, and that's to just pressure test the commercial model of your business. So if any of the things that I have spoken about today resonate with you and you think you may want to discuss or explore those further, that's what that call is for. It's absolutely no obligation. It's just picking my brain for someone that's spent 2 decades in retail and e-commerce. And then if not my website, then the other place is obviously LinkedIn. So everything you can find out about me, my website, what I offer, is also on my LinkedIn profile page, which is LinkedIn/Christabel. So I work fractionally, but I also work on projects. I'm really flexible, and I can come in and work, on a fixed sprint with your business, and really kind of look under the hood. Or I can work fractionally as your operator, whether it's a sort of for a few weeks or whether it's further afield. So yeah, that's what I do. And I kind of do partner with founders and growing businesses.
Oh, thank you. And by the way, that 20-minute call is such a good offer. So I'd encourage anyone who's listened and gone, oh, actually, maybe I've got an issue with whatever it is, to take advantage of that. And I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes as well, to make it super easy if you're listening somewhere and you can't write this down or get to a computer now. So thank you so much for that, Christabel. My last question is, if someone listening is making consistent sales but feels like they're constantly guessing or fighting fires all the time, what would you suggest they take a look at first? Because obviously there's so much that we've covered today.
Yes, absolutely. I think probably the first thing is your time. If more than 30% of your time is firefighting, you've probably got a bit of a process problem there, and you're just kind of not taking a step back to look at things strategically. So that's usually where having someone with operator experience alongside you, even for a few weeks, can make a huge difference to your business and just kind of help you to get clarity, take away that chaos and noise, and really understand how to efficiently operate. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is have a look at your products, look at that contribution margin piece that I've spoken about. If you don't know what your contribution margin is, definitely start here. And if you do, then can you put your products into those 4 buckets that I mentioned, and maybe think about, is there some extra products that you just maybe don't need that are causing distraction? And then the third thing is your cash flow and your cash cycle. So how long is it really between once you've paid your your suppliers for your products, when are you then breaking even I'll start again. Your cash cycle. How long is it between paying your suppliers and then breaking even on your sales? So that is the kind of cash flow of your business, and that's super important to look at as well. But yeah, that's what I would say are those 3 key areas to look at if you are firefighting.
Oh, that's so useful. Thank you so much. And thank you for everything that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Vicky. It's been a pleasure to be here and have a chat with you.
Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. Do remember that you can get the full back catalogue and lots of free resources on my website, vickyweinberg.com. Please do remember to rate and review this episode if you've enjoyed it, and also share it with a friend who you think might find it useful. Thank you again, and see you next week. Hello, if you're selling on Amazon or you're planning to and you'd like ongoing support as you go, I've just opened the doors to my membership, Amazon Made Easy. It's a space for product-based business owners who want expert guidance, somewhere to ask questions and a bit of structure and accountability while they build and grow on Amazon. Inside you'll get regular live Q&A calls with me, optional co-working sessions, practical resources and a supportive community of people all working on similar things. It's designed to make selling on Amazon feel clearer, simpler and much less overwhelming, and to give you somewhere to go where you're stuck or unsure of what to do next. You can join at any time and stay for as long as it's helpful. And if you'd like to take a look, you'll find the full link in the show notes.